In general, most of us take a lot for granted, and it's good advice to try not to instead try to be intentional about recognizing the good things that we have going for us and be grateful for them. Strangely enough, though, there are circumstances where taking things for granted is actually beneficial, even a healthy thing. And our struggles as the pandemic unfurls into its second year of impact on us actually highlight this well. At this point in human history, with our unparalleled access to information, it's increasingly common for people to feel overwhelmed. In reality, the world around us has always held too much information for us to deal with. Let's take our vision as an easy example. Apparently, we only actually focus on and directly process between 1 and 20% of what we see. In essence, we're only really seeing what is directly in the center of our focused gaze. Everything surrounding that is a mesh of less focused visual information and extrapolated data that our brains put together. We mentally fill in something like 80% of what we think we're seeing. Now, there's a good reason for this. To actually process our entire field of vision constantly would be inefficient and exhausting. It's a far more efficient use of our resources to focus on a small portion of what we see and let our brains fill in the rest with assumptions based on past experiences and context. This phenomenon expands beyond just our vision. In Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he makes a distinction between two different types of thinking. System one is pattern recognition. It's automated and tied to our limbic system. We use System 1 all the time. We form habits which lead to shortcuts and efficiency, and it works phenomenally well, until it doesn't. Chairs are a really fun example of how entrenched we are in System 1 thinking. The overwhelming majority of people will recognize that a chair is for sitting on. Our life's experience backs this up, so very few people check the structural integrity of a chair before sitting in it. I mean, there are obvious exceptions, but if a chair passes a cursory visual check that we likely perform in the backgrounds of our minds, we sit in it. We take for granted that the chair will hold us because a lifetime of experience reinforces the assumption. I mean, just imagine how time-consuming it would be to have to do a structural integrity check of every chair before you sat in it. We take for granted that our chairs will hold us. In exchange, we save hours of time per week. A huge chunk of our lives rests in System 1 thinking. Then there's System 2 thinking, critical thinking, focused thinking. Lots of good things come out of System 2. New ideas, new perspectives, a plethora of new. But new is expensive. That's true not just for possessions, but for thoughts. As an example, if you are having a stroll, chatting with a friend, and they bring up something that requires your full attention, you'll instinctively stop walking. On a core level, your brain says, hold on, I'm going to have to turn off autopilot for this. We're going to divert energy away from System 1. Auto functions like walking while talking are suspended. Full throttle energy can go to critical thinking. We can walk later. System 1 takes a lot for granted, but it does allow us to conserve energy and do amazing things when we need to focus and use System 2. Of course, there are loads of examples to illustrate how dangerous it is to relegate some things, like people, into System 1. Misuse of System 1 can lead to prejudice, ignorance, and stereotyping. Used in balanced and healthy ways, though, these two systems and the benefits that we reap from having both at our disposal are a phenomenal example of our body's resource management. Now, here's where the pandemic comes into play. At this point, we're coming up on 2 years of disruption. We've had waves of denial, anger, and resignation. We felt loss, we felt uncertainty, we've changed so many things. There's a lot that we just can't take for granted anymore. Seeing friends in person, being able to travel, just reading the emotions on people's faces. I genuinely believe that some of the stress and anxiety that we're feeling, perhaps even more now than at the beginning of the pandemic, is due to us having to move so many things from System 1 autopilot to System 2 critical analysis. To illustrate this, just the addition of masks has added a step where we have to think about in previously autopilot-worthy adventures. For students in school, teachers in school, parents in jobs, for everyone, a steady stream of changes and a lack of predictability are using up so much more energy than before. We can't autopilot like we used to, so we're using up more resources. And when we experience resource scarcity, we get anxious. I think it's helpful to understand the root of some of our stress and anxiety. It's helpful to know the dynamics that students, teachers, and parents are dealing with. It can also help us to identify where to focus more resources to combat the scarcity at the root of our stress. System 2 thinking, critical thinking, is a good thing, but it is resource intensive. We might benefit from building in some space to compensate for the fact that some processes in our lives that used to be handled on autopilot in System 1 are now in System 2 and therefore cost more. Simply allowing more time in our day for what we used to think of as easy routines can have a positive effect. I mean, you used to be able to get out the door and on the way to school in just 5 minutes, but there are extra steps and checks now, so allow yourself 10 minutes. I mean, you may have been getting by allowing 5 minutes just like before the pandemic, but you're jamming more in, so feel free to give yourself a break. It sounds small, but these allowances add up throughout our days. I mean, in essence, we're asking our brains to do more with the same amount of time and resources. So if we can add time buffers into our resources, we'll feel less strain. It's also worth intentionally helping shift appropriate routines into System 1 where possible. Create patterns, routines, mini traditions even, and it will likely have a stress-reducing effect. Our minds like patterns, and it's amazing how self-soothing it can be just to create the patterns that our minds crave. Recognizing and even celebrating that something has been moved back into System 1 quicksort pile is recognition that more resources are available for System 2 when necessary. I mean, it's as simple as putting a sticky note on your door and making sure you check for your wallet, keys, and mask. And if you've already got that routine down and you no longer forget your mask, that's great. You've moved something back into System 1. Now you can find some other addition to put in that autopilot pile. It's important to recognize that this doesn't mean that you have to accept these new additions to System 1 as permanent. Hopefully, we won't have to wear masks regularly at some point, and then we'll require a shift to get used to life without masks. But for now, we need to free up our strained resources. Moving things to System 1 is not a sign of defeat, it's a sign that we're adaptable and resilient. 2 years in, we're feeling the drawn-out strain of the pandemic. Hopefully, understanding the dynamics of why we feel strained can help us reapportion resources to help ourselves and those around us. Our lives simply cost more thinking power now, but we can make changes, even small ones, that help compensate. I can't wait for us to move on to whatever the next adventure is, but my hope is that we'll take the things that we've learned from these past 2 years with us and use our honed resilience and change management skills for even greater good. Thanks so much for joining me. I do hope you're keeping well.